The city of Aethelgard existed in a state of perfect metronomic harmony, a symphony of industry and order conducted by the great clock that stood at its heart. The clock tower was not merely a building. It was the soul of the city, its polished obsidian face reflecting the clouds that drifted past, its brass gears and mechanisms whirring with a soft, celestial hum that vibrated through the cobblestones and into the very bones of the citizens. This hum was the foundational note of all life in Aethelgard. It dictated the rhythm of existence. At its first soft chime of 5 in the morning, the bakers would begin their work, their hands moving in time with the gentle ticking. At the precise stroke of 7, every merchant in the grand market would raise their shutters in a single, unified clatter. The school bells rang at 8, the luncheon gong sounded at 12, and the lanterns were lit across the city at the 7th hour of the evening. Lovers met under the clock's benevolent face at 9, and all citizens were expected to be safely home by the 12th and final chime that heralded the night watch. This was not seen as a restriction but as a virtue. In Aethelgard, punctuality was piety and efficiency was next to godliness. The system was flawless, a triumph of human ingenuity over the chaotic flow of time itself. The keeper of this magnificent engine was an old woman named Elara. She was the Clockmaker, a title passed down through her family for generations. She lived in a workshop nestled in the very foundation of the tower, a cavernous space filled with the scent of oil and ozone, where pendulums swung like silent giants and the intricate guts of 1,000 smaller timepieces gleamed on shelves. Elara was a woman whose own life seemed to be governed by the same steady rhythm as her charge. Her hair was a long, single plait of silver, her back was straight, and her eyes, the color of a winter sky, held the profound patience of one who conversed with the slow, sure turning of the cosmos. She understood the clock not as a machine but as a living entity, and she listened to its hum as a physician listens to a heartbeat, diagnosing the slightest murmur of imbalance long before it could become a problem. On this particular Tuesday, everything was as it should be. The sun rose on schedule. The market was a model of bustling efficiency. The air was crisp and the sky was a clear, pale blue. Elara was in her workshop, polishing a tiny intricate gear for a chamber clock, her movements slow and precise. It was then that she felt it not a sound but a cessation. A sudden, profound silence that fell over the city like a physical weight. The great hum had stopped. In the square outside, the change was both subtle and horrifying. The world had not frozen solid, but a distinct shimmering sphere of air, roughly the size of a small cottage, had appeared directly in front of the clock tower. Within this bubble, life was suspended in a breathtaking tableau of arrested motion. A young baker's apprentice named Finn was caught mid-stride, a puff of flour from the sack on his shoulder hanging perfectly still around him like a personal galaxy. A little girl with bright, curious eyes named Lily was frozen in the act of dropping her bright red ball, the sphere hovering a hand's breadth from the cobblestones. A songbird was immobilized in mid-flight, its wings outstretched, its shadow a fixed stain on the ground below. It was the 11th hour, and the 11th hour had, quite literally, broken off from the day. The silence that followed was deeper than any mere absence of sound. It was an active void, a pressure on the eardrums and the soul. The normal, comforting soundscape of the city, the distant clang of the blacksmith, the chatter of market-goers, the rhythmic bass line of the clock was simply gone, erased. Elara emerged from her workshop, her face a mask of serene concentration, though a cold dread had begun to uncoil in her stomach. She looked at the shimmering anomaly, and her experienced eyes saw immediately what had happened. This was not a mechanical failure. A gear had not slipped, a spring had not snapped. This was a fracture in time itself, a pocket of now that had become unmoored from the river of then and next. Her tools, her oils, her intricate knowledge of escapements and counterweights, they were all useless here. You could not solder a broken moment back into place. Soon, the citizens of Aethelgard began to gather at the edge of the stillness, their faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and burgeoning panic. They formed a nervous semicircle around the bubble, their normal, clockwork routines utterly disrupted. "The schedule?" cried Mayor Thistlewick, a man whose life was a meticulously kept ledger of appointments and deadlines. He fumbled with his gold pocket watch, shaking it as if it were to blame. His face was ashen. "The midday council meeting, the review of the tax rolls, this is anarchy." "A full hour of commerce lost," wailed a portly merchant named Grumman, clutching at the velvet front of his waistcoat. He gestured wildly towards his shop. "The shipment of silk from the Eastern Pass is due. If I cannot log its arrival, the accounts will be in disarray for a week. The loss, the sheer loss." Their voices rose in a frantic, dissonant chorus, each complaint layering upon the next, creating a wall of noise that beat uselessly against the silent, shimmering sphere. They proposed solutions born of their material world. "A strong rope," shouted a blacksmith. "We can lasso it and pull it back into the clock." "A loud noise," suggested a schoolteacher. "A sudden shock to jolt it back into motion." They saw the broken hour as a stubborn beast of burden or a stuck wagon wheel. something to be forced, coerced, and beaten back into submission. But the little girl, Lily, who had been separated from her red ball by the event, did not shout. She stood at the very precipice of the shimmering air, her small face not contorted in fear but alight with a profound and quiet wonder. She watched the tiny, frozen songbird, its chest still puffed with a breath it could not release. Slowly, driven by an instinct deeper than reason, she reached out a single finger and stepped into the anomaly. The sensation was immediate and strange. It was like walking through a wall of cool, thick honey. The air within was heavy and still, and the silence here was absolute, a pure, unadulterated quiet that pressed in on all sides. She saw Finn, the baker's boy, frozen mid-sneeze, his face screwed up in a comical, agonized expression. A tiny, unbidden giggle escaped her lips. The sound, a tiny, clear silver bell in the vast cathedral of silence, rang out with impossible clarity. And as it did, a single, solitary grain of flour from the cloud around Finn's boots broke free from its stasis and drifted, slow and graceful, to the cobblestones. This small event, this tiny defiance of the absolute freeze, filled Lily with a strange courage. She sat down right there in the middle of the square within the heart of the broken hour. She pulled a piece of white chalk from the pocket of her pinafore and began to draw on the stones. She did not draw the clock or the worried faces of the adults. She drew a fat, cheerful toad with lopsided eyes and a wide, smiling mouth. She named him, in her mind, Jeremiah. Another child, a boy named Sam, who had been watching from the crowd with a mixture of fear and fascination, saw Lily and the emerging toad. Driven by a courage he didn't know he possessed, he crept past the arguing legs of the adults and stepped into the bubble. The silence swallowed him, but seeing Lily's calm concentration steadied him. He saw his own friend, frozen in a game of catch, and instead of trying to grab the suspended ball, he found 3 smooth river pebbles in his pocket and started to juggle them. His movements were clumsy at first, then smoother. His soft, concentrated laughter as he finally managed 3 full rotations joined Lily's, weaving another thin, bright thread of sound into the overwhelming silence. A change began to stir in the frozen hour. The air, which had felt cold and brittle like thin morning ice, began to warm. A soft, golden light pulsed from its very core, a slow, rhythmic heartbeat that had nothing to do with gears or mechanics. The light seemed to breathe in time with the children's presence. They saw this and understood, not with their minds but with their hearts. They were not trying to fix the hour, they were simply being within it. They were filling its empty vessel. They told silly, meandering jokes that had no punchlines. They shared a secret about a hidden nest of sparrows behind the town hall. They worked together to gently guide a frozen kitten down from a low branch where it was stuck, petting it and speaking to it in soft, reassuring tones until it unfroze, blinked its large green eyes, and let out a tiny, vibrating purr that resonated through the bubble like the pluck of a warm, deep string. Elara watched from the edge, her initial dread and helplessness melting away into a profound, awestruck wonder. She saw the children weaving a new kind of time, not from brass and measured ticks, but from the raw, unvarnished material of joy, presence, and shared experience. They were not fighting the silence, they were composing a new song within it. They were healing the fracture not by forcing the edges together, but by filling the gap with something so vibrant and alive that the fracture could no longer exist. They were mending time with moments. She knew what she had to do. It was not the duty of a mechanic, but of a participant. She stepped away from her workshop door, leaving her tools behind. She walked slowly, deliberately toward the golden glow. She stepped into the bubble, the warmth washing over her like a summer sun, the heavy, living silence a balm after the frantic noise of the crowd. She knelt by the children, her old knees cracking softly in the quiet, a sound that seemed to fit perfectly into the new tapestry they were creating. "Tell me," she said to Lily, her voice as gentle as a dove's coo, yet clear as crystal in the stillness, "about your toad." Lily looked up, her eyes bright. "His name is Jeremiah," she declared, without a trace of hesitation. "And he eats only buttercups and moonlight. He can't croak, he sings little opera songs, but only when it rains." As Lily spoke, weaving a fantastical tale of Jeremiah's nightly adventures, and Sam demonstrated his now perfected 3-pebble juggle, the golden light swelled. It grew brighter, warmer, its pulse strengthening until it filled the entire bubble with a radiant, honeyed luminescence. The frozen forms within began to soften at the edges, their stark immobility yielding to a gentle, fluid potential. Finn's suspended sneeze finally erupted, a loud, startling achoo. That made everyone jump and then burst into genuine, ringing laughter. The red ball completed its arc, landing with a soft, definitive thud before rolling to a stop at Sam's feet. The songbird, released from its prison, shot into the sky with a joyful, cascading trill that was a symphony in itself. Then with a soft, sighing chime that held no urgency, only a deep and abiding peace, the broken hour dissolved. It did not snap back into place with a jarring click. It flowed, a river of liquid golden light pouring silently back into the clock face on the tower. The great clock began to tick once more. The familiar hum returned, vibrating through the cobblestones in the air, but it was different now. Everyone felt it. The tick was softer, more melodic. The talk was deeper, more resonant. It was no longer a metronome demanding obedience. It was a heartbeat inviting participation, a rhythm that now seemed to hold within it the memory of laughter and the warmth of shared secrets. Life resumed its flow. The baker's boy, Finn, blinked, looked at the flour dusting his boots in confusion, and then continued on his way, a small, unaccountable smile on his face. The merchants returned to their stalls, but the frantic, grasping energy was gone. The mayor, who had been mid-shout about productivity and tax rolls, closed his mouth. He looked at the now clear sky, took a deep, deliberate breath, and for the first time in a decade, truly smelled the warm, yeasty scent of fresh bread from the bakery. He walked over, purchased a loaf, still warm from the oven, and broke off a piece to eat right there in the square, something he would never have allowed himself time for before. The merchant Grumman, thinking of his unbalanced accounts and the silk shipment, felt a strange calm. He decided the accounts could wait an hour. He turned and walked not to his shop but towards the park, noticing for the first time the vibrant, almost aggressive red of the tulips that lined the path. Elara returned to her workshop, but she left her door wide open, allowing the new, softer hum of the clock to mix with the sounds of the city. She knew the true repair was not in the mechanism, for it had never been broken. The repair was in the heart of the city itself. The clock now measured more than minutes, it measured moments. It counted the space between a shared joke and understanding laughter. It quantified the depth of a quiet breath. And high in the tower, if one looked very closely at the number 11 on the great obsidian clock face, they would see it held a faint, everlasting golden gleam, a permanent reminder to all of Aethelgard of the day a broken hour was not lost, but was profoundly, gently, and beautifully found.